Okay, here we go. Again, going to go quickly. You might have to use your book for reference, and you can always pause it due to our missing class tomorrow, due to emergency at Azusa. So here you go, the Castle Versailles. There it is. Yeah, I do call it Versailles. We can discuss it in class, but when you look at it, it looks like Versailles. There's my wife at Abbey Road. We usually have a little conversation about it, but again, going to the Beatles reference with Abbey Road. Hopefully, everyone knows about that album and what it is. If you're happy and you know it, clap your doll, and then Unstoppable right there. I love that one. Okay, all of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him names. Used to laugh, and now they're kind of up on the wall. Rudolph's got them. So one of my favorite little Far Sides. All right, absolutism: France, Prussia, and Russia. So absolutism, what is it? It's pretty basic. We really don't have to go over it too much. Um, it is simple. A king, especially in Europe, where this is talking about, has all powers and all rights, and they're divine. So it's basically European kings. Most historians have argued now that have just run amok and have gone out of their limits. They're very much imitating the Pope, trying to battle the Pope for power. And so as each person grabs more power, the Pope saying, I'm in charge of everything, these monarchs do the same thing and say, well, I'm in charge of every idea that comes out of our country. And people are subjects, not citizens. Okay, and it's a divine right monarchy. And again, there's really no powers they don't have. And we're just going to talk a little bit about this. A great example of this is a guy named Louis XIV. Now, most of you probably, oh, I know him. He gets his head cut off. No, that's his grandson, Louis XVI. We'll talk about him later in the French Revolution. So Louis XIV, as you can see here, known as the Sun King, builds this massive palace. I usually ask in class, who's been to Versailles, who's been there, and I kind of dislike you for the semester because my wife and I have been there on a honeymoon, and we were on the wrong days, and it was closed. So we had to take that picture that you saw from the outside of it, and we were unable to visit it on the inside. Still a little disappointed about that. 10 miles from Paris, kind of showing you something. Does a king who builds his castle that far out, does he really want to be around his people? No, he doesn't. And he curbs the nobility. Okay, as you can see here, we have this thing called the Estates General. Be sure to know that. That's very much what the British call Parliament and what we call Congress. So the right that the king doesn't have full rule, right? There is someone to help him and to counterbalance him. British has Parliament. We have Congress, right? Our three-pronged system, the courts, president, and the Congress, to frustrate each other so no one's completely in charge. Well, that doesn't happen here. Never ever calls a meeting of the Estates General, ever. So now some of you might be saying, oh, he has to call him? Yeah. That's one kind of really cool thing, if I can jump out real quick, when we talk about our system, that is actually really cool. Does anyone know? You ever hear that on the news? Congress came back from recess today, and I always think, that's pretty cool. Like, is Obama outside playing kickball, with the Congress? Here you go, Joe, get him. And they're throwing kickballs at each other. Well, it's not. It's because they have a recess because it's stated in the Constitution when they must be in session. When. So when the founders do write our Constitution, they're not perfect, but they try their best to fix all the things from the old world they don't like. So Louis rules on his own with an iron fist because he never calls the Estates General. Here's some pictures. I always make a joke that if you dress like this, in this flamboyant outfit, I'll give you 10 points extra credit. And believe it or not, for the first time last semester, I had a student at Azusa dressed like this. And I was shocked. And there's Lauren's drawing there. Fabulous. And again, you can see how I only put these up for just a few seconds, and somehow she had this like photographic memory to make these drawings, which I thought was great. She was a former student at another college, but I really like them. There's the Palace of Versailles right there, as you can see. Again, if you've been there, I will probably slightly glance at you in a hard-mannered way because I'm still upset that we didn't get to go in that thing. So if you ever go to Paris, please be sure to go and please visit. I mean, look at this. It's extraordinary. And if you think most French people live like this today, they don't. And if you think they live like this in the 1600s, they absolutely do not. So you see the extravagance of this man. Here, of course, is the Hall of Mirrors. I really wanted to go into here. The Sixtine Chapel, or the Sistine Chapel, is a replica of it on the ceiling, as you can see. So again, absolute extraordinary way of living when most of your people are hungry and starving. Here's this picture of the gardens here in the castle. It's a pretty amazing place. Okay? Chuck Norris didn't call the wrong number. You answered the wrong phone. Keep that in mind. So remember, we already talked about the Edict of Nantes in 1598, where we started to move towards some religious freedom in France because it was mimicking the Holy Roman Empire next door to it, basically Germany. And Louis comes around and says, nope, forget that. And he revokes that and actually takes a step backward. Most historians would argue, and I would too. He takes a step backwards in this and says Catholicism is the official religion of France. No other forms of Christianity will be tolerated, especially not Protestantism. One king, one law, one faith. Religion of the king will be the religion of the state. So as you can see, this is a step backwards. Okay, it's a direct contrast to the Peace of Augsburg and the Peace of Westphalia and the Edict of Nantes that were passed by Henry IV, I'm pretty sure that was, in France. A lot of Henrys in a lot of countries, gets a little confusing. What else Louis is big for? And again, I do understand I'm going fast right now. I'm just showing you a quick picture of what absolutism might look like in one of these countries. And it's practiced for the most part, not everywhere, but in a lot. Spain, Italy, a little bit, England, this kind of area. War. Louis gets involved in all kinds of war. The main one is the French Indian War, also called the 7 Years' War in North America, which they lose and loses a bunch of money to the British and prestige. And so when he dies in 1715, a lot of rejoicing through France and Europe. So just to show you, again, a small example that's not just in one country, absolutism, Prussia and Russia. And one question I always ask is, what is Prussia? And most students instantly say Russia. And every German in the world shivers, okay? Because Prussia is not Russia. Russia is Russia, of course, and Prussia is the bee's knees. It's kind of like the Texas of Germany. Hopefully we've been together long enough that you understand that now. The Texas of Germany is the prime spot of Germany called Prussia, okay? It's where a lot of the militant Germans will come from in World War I and World War II. So Frederick William, as you can see there, Frederick, like my son's middle name we talked about. He has a bizarre love for tall soldiers who've been credited with superior strength and endurance. He was German. So again, I always like to teach that too. History, remember, it doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. The Nazis will say almost the same thing, right? Aryan race, these tall, superior strength people. Hitler doesn't just make that up. He's looking back on German history. Ivan the Fourth, the terrible, he's terrible. What can I say? He creates this Russian power center around Moscow and starts the Romanov dynasty, which is famous for caviar. And, of course, who all of you will love to talk about when we get to World War I, Anastasia and her family. And lastly, Peter the Great. Tours all around Europe, and he wants to modernize Russia. A very difficult thing to do. Many people argue it's still not done today. Okay, so these men that we've just seen here rule with an iron fist, very much like the Louis in France. So it's a very common occurrence at this time. But one place, again, as we always do, we look at something, there seems to always be an exception, is England. You start to see a decline in absolutism, okay? And you see this between Parliament and the king. Remember, Parliament is just like Congress, keep that in mind. And they're a group of nobles and people who want to curb the power of the king and have power themselves, or share it at least. So I'm not going to give you a whole history on English history. So again, I am going a little quickly now, but even through class, we go through this pretty quickly, okay? So keep that in mind. King James I. Again, you will not need to know this. Just listen to the story so you have a basic of it. Strong proponent of the divine rights of king, okay? But these people in it called Puritans come around, and they are a part of the English Parliament, and they say they want to purify the Anglican Church, this new church that's been started. Remember, it's a break off of the Catholic Church, but it's basically, the Puritans believe, just another version of the Catholic Church. And they want to purify it. That's why they're called the Puritans. They're members of Congress, Parliament, sorry about that, and they want to share power with the king. And what they base their argument on, because history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, is the Magna Carta. Liquid hot magma, yeah, Scotty, okay? And what the Magna Carta is, it's a series of documents from the 1200s that states certain Englishmen have rights. Now, it doesn't say who they are, what their rights are, and so hopefully you can see the connection here with the American Constitution and the Americans that come around, that is, the British people there, Thomas Jefferson, them. Hopefully I don't need to explain that, and we'll talk more about it when we get to the American French Revolution, but hopefully you're starting to make some connections. Jefferson doesn't just wake up one day and say, oh, that's a good idea, Declaration of Independence, a Constitution. They don't just do this. They're looking back on long years of history and trying to correct it. Okay? So again, no need to worry about memorizing this. Charles I, he's a Catholic sympathizer. He is executed and charged for treason. A guy comes after him, Oliver Cromwell. He is a Puritan republic, but by the 1600s, after a few years in power, he's basically a dictator, and they want their king back. They go to Charles II, and he never settles it. And finally, they come to a guy named James II. Here's where it becomes important. Not that you have to know him, but he has produced a male heir, James II. Now, since I sometimes have a Midwestern accent, I say male heir, but that's what they are, right? Male error, E-R-R-O-R. Because a lot of times these sons that are produced to rule end up being bad rulers. And so what happens here, he has a male heir. So when James II dies, it's simple. Who should be the leader of England, the new king? His male heir, because they come around first. Now, speaking of male heirs, be sure to make a note of this. This is a complete male heir right here. His name is Beelzebub, or Beelzebub. You'll want to know that. And he was our dog. Unfortunately, he has passed away. But he's a complete male heir, this guy. Okay? And if you don't know, we've adopted him. We always adopt dogs, and it's my little thing in class. I ask people to be sure they adopt pets instead of buying them at pet stores. Okay? And what happens here is the Glorious Revolution. Be sure to know it. Write it down. So back to it. Who is that guy? I always have to go back because the king's in the James. James II. Once he passes on, who should be king of England? His male heir. But wait a minute. Guess what happens? He also has a daughter, and her name is Mary, and she's in exile in Holland with the Prince William of Orange, which should explain why the Dutch are orange in the World Cup. And long story short is, Parliament comes in, and tells the king, we have an army, and James II's son is not going to be in power, but we're going to bring his daughter in, and we will use our army to enforce it. So, for the first time really in European history, as you see at the bottom, write that down in the Glorious Revolution, 1689, 100 years or a little bit before, almost before ours, she becomes, William of Orange and her, king and queen by the grace of Parliament, not the divine right or God's will, as we said at the beginning of this lecture, divine right monarchy. So to make it very simple so you understand, imagine we have an election. There's a clear winner. Forget the politicians and all this. It's person A. But Congress just steps in and says, you know what? We don't want that. We have another way of doing it. It's person B now. We would be outraged because we have a system, we believe it works, and we've had it for hundreds of years. And that's what happens here in England. But it works. They put him in. So no longer can you say, hey, God is divine that my son will be king. Parliament says, no, we don't need that. We have the power. So you're seeing a step toward secularism or, as we said, non-religious ideas. Chuck Norris has a grizzly bear carpet in his room. The bear isn't dead. It's just too terrified to move. And to wrap this up and be done here, we'll spend more time on this when we get to the American Revolution, so don't worry about it. But as you can see, I always make that joke in class. Everybody copies us. We have a Bill of Rights in 1789. The English have one in 1689, right? So as you can see here, no Roman Catholic should ever be king or queen of England. You could easily put that into the United States, except for, of course, John F. Kennedy. He's our only Catholic president. No standing army used against the English people in peacetime, right? All these things that come out into our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence kind of come from this, okay? From this English. So it's called a contract theory of government is what it is. As you can see here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. John Locke, he's a great philosopher, English philosopher of the time. They base a lot of their ideas on him. Life, liberty, and property. Whereas Thomas Jefferson, who's a plagiarizer, just writes life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the reason he changes that is because in Jefferson's time, what do the Americans he's talking to already have? That's correct. They have property. They don't need property. So it's now time to pursue their happiness. Okay? And again, on this here, you can see a king, a House of Lords, House of Commons. We have a president, a Senate, and a House of Representatives. So Jefferson and them are exactly copying what they've seen in England. So be sure to know that. I mean, if I were to ask, does Thomas Jefferson, do you think he knows about the Glorious Revolution, or did he just make all this up? Of course he knows about it. Absolutely. Very aware of it. And so last thing to know for sure is this does not constitute a democratic revolution. Hopefully you can see that. If you have any questions, be sure to ask in class. We can talk about it due to missing this class for the incident today. But understand that England does not have a democratic revolution. That will be where? In the United States, of course, right? Under these English people who are living there. That's when it will be a democratic revolution. But England in this glorious revolution has one step closer to secularizing their government and to setting up a system that doesn't rely on something that, oh, God divined it. It's actually more people can do it and they can make these decisions. So know that it is not a democratic revolution in England. It just formalizes Parliament's power and gives them the right to rule along with the king. Okay, best of the bulletins. The sermon this morning, Jesus walks on water. The sermon tonight, searching for Jesus. Two really good sermons, but maybe not to be made on the same day, okay? All right, have a good one.